Okay, we get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the FOIA for Organizers panel. This is, I believe, one of the first panel slot of FOIA Fest, which is super exciting. So thank you for all for joining us. We have all of our panelists here on Zoom. So just the goal of this panel is to demystify the basics of FOIA and show how the general public and organizers can use a lot to acquire information and improve their everyday lives and their fight for justice. So as a brief introduction to me, the moderator, my name is Taylor Moore. I'm a freelance journalist in Chicago, where I write about arts and culture, social justice. I am the vice president of programming for the Chicago Headline Club. I am also a board member of the Asian American Journalists Association, and I'm also an organizer with 48th Ward Neighbors for Justice, an IPO on the far north side of the city. And then with that said, just want to go around and introduce our panelists today. So I'll just start in alphabetical order. Ramson, would you like to go?
Sure. Thanks, Taylor. I'm Ramson Cannon. I am currently an attorney, labor and employment and land use and environmental law and civil rights law attorney in Chicago. Before that, I got my start as a union organizer and a community organizer with SEIU and Acorn in Chicago. After that, I was an organizer and worked on campaigns, organizing campaigns with the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, Council 31, have been involved in various organizing activities since then, including an effort to fight the Olympics coming to Chicago in 2008 and 2009, No Games Chicago. And most recently was the political education coordinator for the Chicago chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. But have been practicing law both in Illinois and in California since 2000, I don't know, for a bunch of years, last handful of years. That's me.
Kelly?
Sorry, did you say me? I couldn't hear that. Me? Okay, cool. Hi, my name is Kelly Garcia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a freelance reporter. I cover education. Fairly new, like half a year into this now. I'm also an organizer with 48th Ward Neighbors for Justice, and I'm the co-chair of the education committee. So a lot of the work that I do, whether it's in journalism or in organizing, is really centered around education. Local school councils. I covered the movement to get rid of cops in schools. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Also coordinating FOIA Fest too, which is a really fun experience. Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Myra?
That's me. Hey everyone, I'm Myra. It's an honor to be here with this like illustrious panel, and it's amazing to hear you say, Kelly, that you've only been working as a journalist for 6 months because your impact has been phenomenal. If you haven't read Kelly's education reporting, please do. So I'm Myra. I'm director of public strategy at the Invisible Institute. I also, on the side, work with another panelist, Trina Reynolds-Tyler, on multimedia projects, basically, that make legal and political information more accessible to young Black and Brown people. But through the Invisible Institute this past year, I co-organized the Release the Records campaign, which is an ongoing effort to force the city to comply with its legal obligation to make transparent all police misconduct records going back to 1968. So we could talk more about that, but it's been a really interesting way to tie FOIA information and knowledge into the overall campaigns of the past year and beyond of defund CPD, et cetera. So yeah, that's me.
Trina?
Peace, y'all. My name is Trina Reynolds-Tyler. A lot of people know me as Trina T or Trina T Trill. I am a Chicago native. I'm the director of data at the Invisible Institute. We house the Citizens Police Data Project, which is really this database full of police misconduct records that currently go back to 1988, information that we received through FOIA requests. Through working with CPDP, we've learned the importance of like actual documents outside of just like this kind of top level data that that even lives in CPDP. That's so important. Outside of that, I started as an organizer with BYP 100 on a Say Her Name campaign for Rekia Boyd to get the officer Dante Servin fired. I've also am on the local school council for the South Shore International College Prep. I am on the leadership team for R3, and I am a part of the Black Abolitionist Network and participated in the Defund CPD campaign over the past summer. I've also done lots of mutual aid work on the ground with community folks. Yeah, and my pronouns are she, they. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, everyone. So everyone, the way this panel is going to work from now until 5:40, I'll be asking questions of our panelists, and then we're going to reserve the last 20 minutes for audience questions. So feel free to drop questions into the chat box, and then Andrew Ferreira, who is in our panel doing some like operations work, will be feeding questions to us to read during the last 20 minutes. So feel free to drop questions in the chat anytime, and then they'll get answered toward the end. So to start off, I'm curious how for you all do such great and amazing and very different work. So I'm curious how public documents and FOIA has shaped and advanced your own work as organizers. And any of you can go, feel free to jump in. And also if questions aren't relevant, feel free to skip. So.
Start.
I'll get us started and talk a bit about how public records. I know we're all just so excited to talk about public records. So for me, you know, one of the things the Invisible Institute is most known for is like the uncovering of the Laquan McDonald story. Like I think it's, you know, I hate to like be dramatic about it in that way, but it really was like, because honestly, it really was like a FOIA request, and it was a FOIA request for an autopsy. And I think like people don't always recognize or understand how easy it is to submit a FOIA request. I literally sent one last night that said, "Hi, please send all summary report digest for police officer, insert name." And then I said, "Thank you," right? But like, I think it really, for me, public records has helped me to understand that like it's important to always ask more questions and to pull more information and detail through the Citizens Police Data Project. Like we have all of this like data in the form of an Excel spreadsheet, but like something that I'm constantly trying to talk about is how like just because we see something in the form of like an Excel spreadsheet doesn't mean that we have the full picture. Just because someone runs analysis on an Excel spreadsheet doesn't mean they have the full picture, because we have to think about the data generating process and how we got from a literal document, or actually how we got from a person's lived experience to a document, right? Then to ultimately, right, this like data set. And so for me, when I think about public records and documentation, I'm always thinking about people's narratives and people's stories and people's experiences. And it really helps me. I'm always trying to be grounded in like, just because we're looking at data right now in the form of a CSV or whatever, right? We should not just think about that. We should think about all of these people who I think many folks consider as data points as like whole human beings, whole experiences that many times are like wholly traumatic and disruptive. Yeah, thank you.
I can pick up off of that. I think something that's super useful about FOIA beyond the uncovering aspect of it, right, comes to us in a way, is yeah. No. Yes. No. Can you hear me? You can. Okay, great. So sorry about that. So with FOIA, I think like a lot of us think about it in terms of like the pure journalism, uncovering something. And I think that, you know, that is important as a catalyst, the ways that stories can be catalysts and tools in organizing. But I also think that FOIA is a really useful tool for education. And I think a lot about the work I've done over the past 4 years in Hyde Park Academy as a part of the Youth Police Project. A really important education tool has been looking up an officer in a Citizens Police Data Project. And then when you actually read the narratives, when you read the documents that we requested and received, to read somebody's story of harm that they allege that the officer at their school like did to them, right? And to read those narratives, you can pick out as a student or as a person who's maybe also interacted with that officer, oh, this thing that I maybe have witnessed them doing, like this falls under like this type of misconduct. Or, you know, you can see something that Trina works on a lot is like hidden instances of gender violence or of sexual abuse. And so to see something that is very sexual in nature that maybe wasn't classified in the overall data sentences or data depictions of the police, I think it makes very real to people the nuances and the challenges that come along in our organizing fights. So I think in addition to like the sort of like mind-blowing like lessons or mind-blowing like reveals that we might get from FOIA, I also think it's just a very useful education tool, which is important for organizers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think FOIA, at least in the work that I've been doing around education, has really like given me a lot of answers and has helped me piece a lot of puzzles together. Particularly with local school councils this year, what I was able to do is like FOIA, basically a lot of minutes or a lot of information related to like local school councils in general, like historically, and that has better informed my reporting around like the history of engagement and effectiveness of local school councils. And so for me, I use FOIA to really like give me background on things and to really educate me on the things that I'm reporting on. Additionally, it also like has better informed me on like what approach to organizing to take. I use FOIA a lot in like my local school communities, which is like a very different process, I think, than like just going to go file a FOIA request through like an agency. And what I've been able to uncover is really like looking at who my elected officials are talking to, right? Like, what are they doing? And so that to me has allowed us to like better organize, better, figure out what next steps we really want to take based on what we find via FOIA. So like FOIA has really been supplemental to our organizing. And I agree with everything Myra has said. It's really been an important tool for education and adding background to a lot of the things that we're doing.
Ramson, did you want to add anything?
I was thinking of what I could add to what was already said, which was also good. I didn't want to just say, I mean, I do want to say that was all great. I don't know what else to add. I don't want to just talk for the purpose of talking. Maybe one additional thing would just be that, FOIA, the tool of FOIA really helps us understand the distinction between the formal way things operate or are supposed to operate and the actual way. The way things are sort of by formality and the way they are in practice, which can help you understand. It's sort of like seeing the waves on the face of the lake or the ocean, for us, the lake, I guess, and then understanding what the currents are underneath it and why we're seeing those blips that we actually see. It helps you understand who actually has responsibility for certain things, especially when it comes to something like city government and city agencies. The reality is so many decisions that actually have a huge impact on people's lives are made by, people who are in non particularly sexy or fancy job titles, who are just doing their day-to-day job. And that's not something that, people will say the mayor did this or the mayor's office or, such and such agency. But in reality, it's a lot of decisions that are being made at this sort of banal medium layer level. And FOIA is really critical to helping us unravel that and sort of like apply an X-ray or an MRI, so we understand what the actual mechanics are, and that can help us understand why we're seeing what we're seeing out in the world.
That's a great point, and something that made me think of. I feel like when I've sent FOIA requests, it's sometimes it's not so much the documents that I got back that was helpful. It was the process of corresponding with the FOIA officer, all like the back and forth, the stuff that they won't give us, or if records they don't keep. Do you all have any examples of times where that's happened to you, where the process ended up becoming more illuminating than the actual thing you were requesting?
Yes. I think almost every time I've filed a FOIA request, I feel like I've run into some sort of trouble with whichever FOIA officer I'm like working with. Meeting deadlines is really hard for a lot of agencies. Like meeting that like 10-day rule, like you legally have 10 days to respond to a FOIA request is, I mean, truly, sometimes it's rare to get it on by the 10 days. I've also run into, specifically in Chicago public schools, when you can file a FOIA request through individual schools. And so when I've done that before, sometimes I like run into you're filing a FOIA request through the wrong person, which is interesting because all schools have a FOIA officer through their local school council. So I've run into the question of like, who is the right person to send information to? City council, I've done that too as well. I was trying to file, I think I was covering budget season in the fall, and it was like unclear who to file a FOIA request related to, I think like recordings of meetings. Like I didn't know whether to go to the city clerk or like the committees or something. I forgot what it was, but I think sometimes I learned that like, sometimes it's unclear who like to file a FOIA. Like some agencies don't have like a fancy portal where you can file a FOIA request like CPS does. And so that really adds a lot of hurdles to any investigations or projects that we're working on. But yeah, really the basic essentials to FOIA is usually sometimes the hurdles that I've been put through.
Awesome. And Myra and Trina, I'm curious about the projects you've worked on at Invisible Institute. A lot of that is culling through thousands of rows of data in order to serve the public, help people find certain records that are related to police officers or their own charges. Would you be able to speak to that?
I think my answer kind of also responds to your earlier question. I think something that's really interesting about what we've learned as like FOIAing as an organization is we actually have like a couple of people at the organization who send a lot of FOIA requests. And part of what is like important about that, Sam Stecklow is like the main, you should follow him at Sam Stecklow. I learned everything I know about FOIA, I learned from him and our legal director, Chaselyn Hunt. And it's interesting because, you start to like learn who the FOIA officer is for whoever you're FOIAing, and you see them as like a person who literally does not have enough time. And it makes you realize like the things that they deny you on and the things they say yes to, you kind of learn how to like talk to them, like, what works with this FOIA officer. And so something about like cultivating that like frequent correspondence is like, you sort of get to the point where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to send these ones because they're higher priority. And like, you just learn to like pace them out more. And so in terms of like what you learn from just literally sending the FOIA request is like, you can kind of build not a relationship, but you build like a understanding if the more you send FOIAs to whichever department. I also think like something we've learned that has been really interesting is to see what things are redacted and what's not, and that it's not a perfect science. Like things are redacted by a person. And so there are things where you're like, ooh, they should have redacted that. or vice versa, where you're like, this actually isn't transparent because you gave me this document, but like this bulk thing is redacted. And then the last thing I'll say about Invisible Institute lessons is this current fight with Release the Records came from this case, Green versus Chicago, where as a part of this man's quest, Charles Green's quest to establish his innocence, he made a FOIA request of requesting all misconduct records going back to 1968, knowing that there was like the Calvin decision, the precedent in Illinois that makes all police misconduct records available to the public. And they blew their deadline to that point of like what takes them a long time. And so because they blew their deadline, they now have to comply and give us all these records. And it has taken years. Like we are still in the process of trying to receive all of these documents. And so just learning like the time that it takes for them to find the documents, scan them, digitize them, redact them, the process of like the banality, like to borrow Ramson's word, is really interesting to witness, and the patience that it takes.
So for me, I came into the Invisible Institute like not knowing how to look at data like at all. When I came in, I was just like fresh off of my like BYP 100, like people, you know, we're talking about Rakia Boyd and other people as well. And folks kept saying like, well, they should have done something different or like that, like this is an isolated event. And I was like the communications co-chair. And I was trying to figure out like, how can we like string these things to get these stories together? And around then, that's when I became an AmeriCorps member at the Invisible Institute. A very random, funny story that one day I'm sure I'll tell the world. But when I was there, I first was looking at the data through CPDP version 1, right? Like it was like limited, not the version that we're looking at today, something with far more limited information from a very different time period. And I remember Enlace was like interested in a specific officer or commander or something. And they were like, can y'all look up things? And I was like, I mean, Chaselin was like, well, Trina, like talk to Bokar and then like listen to what he says. And Bokar was like, look at these spreadsheets. These spreadsheets connect by based on like the unique, you know, he didn't, I don't know if he used the word unique ID, but he told me that. And so at that point I was like, all right, I'm out to look at spreadsheets and like, you know, I'm going through and I was looking at use of force data and I remember looking at the data and like line by line, okay, he shot his weapon. How many times the weapon was shot? 81. You know, I'm like, that's a lot of times somebody shot. Like there was a whole shootout. Basically, the person who I was like looking into had been a part of. But it went from like me looking at these like lines on the data to like, oh, like piecing together a story and like even doing some Googling and finding a news article that was written about it. And then today I'm like using R to program in order to like, you know, understand these like much larger Excel spreadsheets that you can't look at line by line to understand what's going on. And so for me, I think like it's very encouraging to me, and it should be to others, that like, you know, just because right now you're looking at Excel spreadsheets or you're like looking at random documents doesn't mean that one day you won't have the toolkit to like run some analysis and like answer some questions that people have, you know, about like how many, you know, what is the rate at which they use force against like in Chicago in 2012, right? Like there are resources that are really at the tips of your fingers that you can tap into. And so for me, that's like always my story when people ask me about it, because I think there are levels and layers to the way we engage with data, and there's so much room for growth.
Great. Something I'm also curious about that I heard in things that Kelly and Trina were saying was just the difficulty sometimes in like translating a specific goal. It's like someone may like, I'm thinking about like an organizer who may not be as accustomed to how FOIA works, and it may seem intimidating. and but they want to know certain information like how many evictions may have taken place in their ward, how the local school council may be interacting with the alderman, or like those types of questions. And they may have like a specific goal of like using that like kernel of information to like launch a campaign or a campaign to like call the alderman. So thinking about that, I'm wondering if you have any advice, if you all have any advice for anyone who may have like particular questions or organizing goals and like trying to direct that into requesting documents. But I feel like that's also like a big barrier, like not only like just like finding the FOIA officer, but like not understanding like what pieces of information is being held with the agency, because that's also because that the information they may have is like lies somewhere in the agency, but that information may not even be super well organized. Do you have any advice for anyone trying to like parse that out?
I can jump in on that one, if that's all right. I think it will oftentimes vary a lot between the type of campaign and the type of organizing and the type of organizer you are. So for example, I can tell you that when, on different union organizing drives, when we were dealing with public sector, or a lot of times sort of quasi-public sector employers, so for like nonprofit hospitals, for example, you're just trying to go in there and make as many requests as you can, just to dig through them and see if you can find anything juicy in there, which is one, and more power to you. Go on your expedition, see what you can find. But in other instances, so the example you gave of like evictions, for example, how many evictions are happening in this ward, right? If that, not specifically for evictions, but for that type of thing, I mean, for me, that would usually start with talking to, because, the way usually it works out is something's happening in your neighborhood, in your workplace, in your community, and you're trying, and, so you've come across people who are like, oh, this messed up thing happened to me, X, Y, and Z. And start by talking to them and reconstruct where they may have come across a public body, right? Because the essential thing of FOIA is that it applies to public bodies. That's the basic rule of FOIA. Public bodies are subject to FOIA, only public bodies. So did they have to fill out a form at some point? Did someone call them from a specific agency? Do they remember what the agency was? Do they remember who that person was that talked to them? And once you have that basic bit of information, then you can kind of start working backwards to say, okay, well, so-and-so had to fill out this kind of form. Maybe they have a copy of it, so you're looking at the form. Does the form have a form number on it? Does the form have a title? So that you can, then maybe start at the biggest level you can. So you can then submit a request to that agency that says, this is a freedom of information request. I want the policy that's related to this form, that has to do with whatever form that was that filled out. And I'd like to see every form of that type that was submitted between these dates. And a little trick of the trade, always include dates, because that's the number one reason people reject your FOIA requests. They're like, this is too broad. You want to going back to 1920, we have these records. So, between these dates and if does that form include addresses? Like, for example, the person you talked to, did they have to fill in their address in that case? Like, okay, then also say for these zip codes. So for example, you might get a huge crush of information. You might have them come back and say, we've only got 5 of those. They might say, we can give them to you, but we're going to redact them, and we get to charge you for all the time we spend redacting them. So get ready for that. But in any case, start broad, start with the policy, start with the decision maker that's relevant, start with the, maybe it's the Department of Public Health. But within the Department of Public Health, there's dozens of offices and bureaus and all types of things. So like, which sub-agency handled it? Get the organizational chart. You can, one thing I always suggest to people is FOIA the organizational chart, the current organizational chart, so it shows who actually is working in these different positions. And then you'll get a better understanding of why these forms, I know it's kind of a little abstract now because we're not using a specific example, but you can get a better reason of the procedure, the process, the rules that apply, and the personnel that are responsible. And then you can start reconstructing to build the type of databases that, Trina was talking about, where you start to understand, okay, this is the, this is the basic information that's always going to come in: name, address, date, these types of things. So if I'm going to start to build a database where I'm trying to find patterns and trends over time, I know the type of fields I'm going to have in that database. I know how I'm going to have unique identifiers. I know how I'm going to have dispositions of each case, right? Is each form that's submitted, does it result in like a approved, denied, whatever, okay, then I'm going to know that type of disposition. So I think that's kind of addressing the question that you raised, Taylor.
That was amazing. I can't even follow that up. Honestly, that was great. I kind of just wanted to give like my own experience when I first started to file FOIA requests over the summer. I'll be honest. So Chicago Public Schools, a CPS, when you file a FOIA request and you create an account and all that, they actually have like a FOIA archive. So you can see what other people have filed a FOIA request for. Truthfully, I went in there and I would just start copying and pasting, like if someone else was filing like a personnel file for someone, like I would just do the exact same thing, just change the name of the person. Because like it's really complicated sometimes, right? To know the law, to know like the exact language you're trying to use. So that really helped me a lot. I know that this is kind of like next step after you figure out how to file a FOIA request, but you can also file a FOIA request for FOIA requests as well. So you can see what other people have. And again, like I mostly FOIA CPS or City Council, but with CPS, you can see what requests they've actually have actually been approved or requests have been denied. So it's really helpful in looking at, who may have information that you need and talking to them, figuring out how they went about filing their own FOIA requests. So that's just like my own experience. It was just like a very cheap, let me go copy and paste, but it's helped me a lot. So.
The only thing I would add is if there's something in a spreadsheet, if you're asking for a spreadsheet, and there's a way that they classify race or something like that, and you're like, I don't understand what those letters are, you can also try to request like the glossary or dictionary of like what these acronyms mean. You might not always find it, but I think it's okay if you get something back from the city and you're like, I don't understand what these things mean. That happens. And then it just sort of begins your narrowing and follow-ups of requests. So the goal is to get narrower and narrower.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. Years ago, I helped on a project for We Charge Genocide that was submitting a report to United Nations. And I think one of the things we did for this was a few years ago now, but one of the things we did was we looked at the Chicago Police Department field manual, like their procedures manual, and we found the, and I think it was online. I don't think we had to FOIA that, but we found the code in the manual for like use of force, use of force rules, and then we built the FOIA around that code. So it was, we want all documents between these dates, et cetera, that reference this code number from the manual. And you can see how that could be applied across a lot of different agencies, including, CPS, IDPH, you could think of the agency, but when you found the rule that, if it's around evictions, if it's around whatever, if you found the state statute or the administrative rule and you have the specific citation, you can say, I want documents, communications, memorandums, whatever, that reference this rule or this citation, between these dates. And that can often help you produce the type of records you're looking for.
I also really want to add really fast too. Two things are important. One, you don't have to say why you're filing a FOIA request for something. You don't have to include that. You don't have to say what you're using it for. I'm sure I'm going to get pushback from FOIA officers who may be watching this, but like you also don't have to say who you are technically speaking. So I know like, again, with CPS, you have to make an account. Nowhere does it say it has to be your real name. I'm sure someone's going to give me like shit for saying this later on, but like you don't have to really use your own like personal email or name on that. So like FOIA requests can be anonymous in some ways. Because I just know, I think about a lot of teachers and parents that I know who have experienced a lot of retaliation. And so I know that FOIA requests can be intimidating just for that reason, right? Like not wanting a certain agency to know why you're filing a FOIA request. And so I try to think about those tactics a little bit. So yeah, those are just 2 tips that I wanted to include.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's kind of getting at the truth that these documents belong to us. It's our federal right to have access to this information. And, you know, like the fact that we have to like go through this process, like of, I don't know, like having like, you know, this third party facilitating this, all this like information, it still belongs to us. So even though like someone may give like pushback, I think we are well within our right for asking and for pushing back against any of the, you know, most common reasons why FOIA requests tend to get denied, which is, you know, like this request may be unduly burdensome. So someone saying it's just essentially too much work to request them, to pull them on their end. So one thing that this is the last question before we go into audience questions, if we have them. So when managing large-scale projects, so this may be more relevant to Myra and Trina over at Invisible Institute, but I'm curious, like, if there are like large-scale projects that are like long-term, or they may involve like multiple people touching it, how do you organize all of that information and make it manageable?
That's a great question. So, I have limited experience with, you know, managing Citizens Police Data Project, but I do think something I have learned throughout my years there of how FOIA has worked and has been a part. It's a very slow, ongoing thing. Is the systems that you set up with like Document Cloud or Dropbox, and using like maybe a scraper tool to like continually update something. Trying to understand the process in like the smallest bite-sized chunks is really, really helpful. Like you don't have to have all of the work done, like all your FOIAs, because some FOIA requests will take you months and months and months to get back, right? Like we're still slowly receiving the green documents. So thinking about a FOIA project, if it is like a big project, which I think Trina can speak to one that she's working on, but I think trying to think about your work as like as small of you know, outcomes as possible. And then a tool that I really love that we used with the Chicago Police Torture Archive for managing a lot of documents, and Sam Stecklow makes FOIA requests around the country, is Airtable. Airtable is incredible because there's a lot you can do on it for free. I think once you get past 30,000 records, like rows, then you have to start paying. And then you can also embed documents. So you could be working on your spreadsheet and you could click and open a document. You can link to like Document Cloud or whatever. But I do think Document Cloud is very useful for organizing your FOIAs. And I think Airtable is an exceptionally great project management tool for this type of work, for organizers, journalists, whoever. Big Airtable fan.
Yeah. So I am currently working on a project which is a machine learning project, which will require volunteers to me to send things to volunteers to send them back to me to like check and visualize that stuff, and then work with this team of other folks who are going to we're going to feed it into the machine. Like it's a whole, everything is interconnected. Everything needs everyone in order to make it happen. And my favorite thing to do is draw things out. Like I'm a visual learner. And so I think it's really nice when you can like imagine yourself as an individual and then draw arrows and like other boxes around like other really important folks. I mean, I think people like to do this like on the internet, but like I love a good journal where I can just like visualize the necessary steps that I need to take so that I can see that there are no holes in like my strategic plan. I do not like Slack at all. I know there are a lot of Slack lovers out there. It's a great way to communicate for some, not for me. I love a good like office hours or like a weekly meeting where we just check in on the phone. I love a good like quick text kind of way of communicating and organizing projects. I mean, Invisible Institute uses Basecamp, which is like, I think a nice platform as well, even though all of these platforms are very, just very odd to me. And I love a good like reminder, right? Because especially with FOIA requests, you have to like really remind yourself to follow up so that you can get what you need. And that's where Google Calendar is like really your best friend. If you're like managing a big project, even if you're like, I have to call this person at this time, or I have to text this person at this time. I literally just put it in my calendar. Shout out to Dr. Eve Ewing for putting me on to Google Calendars, or like as just, just fill it up with all the things that you need to do, because those kinds of notifications, it just like, it is a really helpful way to integrate like your life, your balance, where you're like, actually, I'm relaxing and resting right now, with the, oh snap, my deadline is like quickly approaching this week. Like I'm gonna put that on my to-do list so I can handle that.
And on the projects where we've had to manage large amounts of documents, and it's a little different between whether you're getting data and documents. Those are kind of, you're going to probably treat those a little differently. Strictly speaking, they're only, public agencies under the Illinois law are only required to give you records. So they don't actually have to create data for you. That doesn't mean they won't, but they don't have to. But if you're getting a lot of documents, so PDFs, let's say, one thing that I found useful, if I know it's going to be a flood of documents, and in some cases we've gotten hundreds or thousands of documents that amount to tens of thousands of pages sometimes, it's useful to consider whether there are like native to the documents identifiers. So like earlier we were talking about forms, right? So if you're dealing with individuals, they're not going to give you their social security number, but is there some unique identifying code or something on the document itself that you can use to make sure that you have a unique identifier for each document, and then creating an index or a table that basically then for you and the people who are reviewing the documents to go through and be like, okay, this is document 001-A, and this is the person it involves, and this is its contents, and you have a table. I think Airtable is a great idea. You can include links to the documents, especially if it's PDF, like as a field in the table. If the documents don't have their own unique identifiers, then you should consider how you're going to create those. So it could literally be like, we're expecting 100,000 documents, so 00001, 00002. You could do it that way. If you're going to get different classes of documents, so some of them are going to be communications like emails, some of them are going to be reports. You could have report -001, communication -002, and be thinking as much as you can ahead of time how you are going to want to catalog the material, where you're going to, and basically what the index is going to look like for you. The index is more important, I think, than where you put it. I mean, put it in a Dropbox folder, put it in, wherever. Somewhere where you can create a link to it is usually helpful. But really how you're going to classify it, and the fields you're going to use in your index table to so that you don't have to go scrolling and trying to read the file names to determine what's in them, but rather so that you can always open like a spreadsheet somewhere that has a unique number and then as much quantifiable information as you can pull out of that document, so that eventually you can do the type of things that, again, that Trina's talking about, where you can do like a meta-analysis of those documents, like 40% of these records show X, right? And you can do that a lot easier if you've created a table that shows what the contents of each unique document is.
Great, thank you, everyone. So we have quite a few questions coming in from the chat, so I'm gonna go down the line. Biriam Bimani asks, how do we incentivize government transparency when we file FOIA requests? Should organizers have an attorney ready to file a lawsuit if and when a public agency doesn't respond?
I love that question because that's something I think about a lot. I think, it's like normalized how much FOIA agencies are like not required to respond on time or like not required to hand over public documents. Something I try my best to do now is the minute, like if it's been 10 days, it's due Friday at 4 p.m., 4:01, I'm emailing Matt Topic, who's like one of the lawyers who gives like a lot of legal representation for FOIA cases. Like I'm emailing him, I'm like, they didn't respond. Like, I'm sorry, like that's it. I think that we need to set that standard. I think it's really important. Because then we can create like systems of accountability for FOIA agencies that don't exist. And that makes it really hard to access a lot of these public records, as we said earlier, that belongs to the public. So I forgot what was the second part of her question, but yeah, I mean, again, that's like, I know it's hard again to like get legal representation. So I think it's important to also share those resources. And yeah, it's also, I was seeing another question on there too that's related to this, but I would love to see some sort of, I don't know, like project, like some sort of coalition with organizations that like you can start like publicizing what's some shit that we haven't gotten via FOIA. Like what are some requests that haven't, like I know people who have like filed FOIA requests like years ago, months ago, that haven't gotten a response. So I think it's important for us to really, I don't know, publicly shame some agencies around that. So that's just what I have to say about that.
I would say, like, if you want to, with it, like, I think it's important for the FOIA officer to know that you understand how FOIA works. Because like FOIA officers are going to respond to people who they know who they know knows that they have to respond, or else like at the Invisible Institute, like I think we're like known for FOIA. So like the people know, like at invisibleinstitute.com, they're like, oh, that's the Invisible Institute. I'm sure of it. I don't know this, right? But I know of instances where they have clearly demonstrated that they know they're familiar with the Invisible Institute, and we've seen it in so many FOIA requests. Well, who they may not be familiar with, it might be useful for, oh, my feed is cutting out. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think you just came back in.
Okay. You can hear me, put it in your email, how much time thank you. You should put in your email, like, oh, based on the X, Y, and Z, like you have X amount of time to respond. Awesome. And you could put in the email, like per my email request. Per to my request. And that'll incentivize them on the other hand, because they'll know that you know your rights.
Not to put myself out of work, but you don't need a lawyer. but it always helps to have a good one. I think the advice given so far is really 100% on point. Just let them know ahead of time. I know the law, so you're not going to be able to like kind of jerk me around. You know, I know you have to respond with this within this many days. I know that if you're going to claim an exemption, you have to tell me which exemption. I know that if part of my request can't be filled, you still have to fill the part that can be filled. That's part of the reason why in your request, it's always important to include them as, if you have multiple parts of your request, include them separately, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you can say, if any of these can't be filled for any reason, fill the ones that can be, and then we'll deal with the ones that you're claiming can't be, so that they can't just blanket say, can't do that. But yeah, I think having an attorney who's experienced with open government and government transparency litigation it's always helpful.
Next question is, what's the penalty against an agency that doesn't give you the information in a timely manner?
Well, if they blow their deadline, they are legally required to produce it, as we saw in the Green case. So, however, that still might take a really long time. There's a really funny or weird story in Seattle a few years ago where they blew a deadline on like body cam footage, and so then they ended up hiring the person who made the request because it would have to become like a full-time job to basically upload body cam footage to YouTube and like redact it and everything. And so that's how body cam footage in Seattle is like proactively made public, was through a blown deadline. So yeah, the punishment is compliance, but it shouldn't be a punishment. It should just be what they do.
Yeah, penalties, compliance. If there are willful violations, they also can be required to pay civil penalties for each instance of willful noncompliance. You also have the authority to either file a complaint with the Public Access Counselor, which is an office under the Illinois Attorney General, or you can file a lawsuit in circuit court of the area where the public agency sits. So in the case of Chicago, that would be Chicago Municipal Court or Chancery Court in Chicago. And if you win, they have to pay your attorney's fees. So the requirements or the penalties are pretty stringent, especially if their violations are willful. And what makes them willful is if it's basically they knew or should have known that they were violating the law. So if they applied some exemption that they clearly should not have applied. An exemption is an exemption from FOIA. So things like personnel records, certain types of personnel records, personal information like social security numbers, trade secrets, stuff like that is exempt from FOIA. If they willfully applied an exemption incorrectly and you can prove that in court, then yeah, you can even get civil penalties from them. And then of course they have to both produce the records and potentially pay your attorney's fees for the case.
Next question. I'm gonna try to fly through these. So Maria Raphael asks, in the spirit of these documents being the public's documents, are we allowed to share FOIA responses widely? Or is there some limitation that only the FOIA requester can access the responsive raw documents? Everyone is shaking their head.
Yeah, share it. You can share widely. And so Muckrock is an example of this. Like they have all of that information online for you to access.
I've seen, yes, it's public. I've heard stories where agencies forgot to redact something, and then it was a data breach. So just be on the lookout for that. Not your fault, obviously, but they are absolutely public. So just, look over that.
Great. Next question. Julia Gerasimenko asks, is it typical for there to be charges associated with FOIA requests? CTA and PaceBus charge past the CTA and Pacebus charge past the first 8 hours spent, and for print copies over 50 pages. She comments that it seems absurd, and I agree, that seems absurd. So for the requests you typically run into, do you get charged?
I feel like I'd be most interested in the attorney's experience with this. Not with our request to CPD, from what I know. But I do know in making requests in other states and other agencies, that is a thing that we've seen. Some states charge a lot, and it's completely ridiculous. It's almost like you're paying for like the labor of getting it. But yeah, every state is different, and I believe every agency is different. But yeah, other people's experiences with this.
Most of my experience is with the Public Records Act in California and primarily the FOIA law in Illinois. Illinois is pretty good about it, at least pretty good about spelling it out, so it's predictable. It's actually Section 6 of the FOIA statute. So the full citation is 5 ILCS 140/6, authority to charge fees. And there is a lot of, they break it down into like how many megabytes and if it's of this kind of, if they have to create PDFs, and there's all these rules, but it's spelled out, and it's an upper limit. All of the fee rules in there are upper limits. They can't go above this. It can only be for, this amount. I think the most they're allowed to charge for actual labor is up to $10 for each hour spent searching for and retrieving records, but only after 8 hours. So only after one shift, I guess you could say one person's workday, then they can start charging $10 an hour. But I think they can't charge more than that $10. But that Section 6 will spell it out. They do that in theory because it is a cost to the taxpayer, supposedly, is the justification for it. But and part of it too might be because of commercial requests and those kind of requests that they get. But unless we lobby to change to state law, those are where the fee amounts are written. In my experience, most agencies will just give you stuff. They won't charge you, because probably on their end, managing the fee system would be more work than just like, searching the emails and printing them to a PDF is easier than creating a whole fee system. But they do have the authority to do it.
Then this may be our last question. Joe Engelman asks, how do FOIA rules differ for public agency reporting versus, say, a current or former public official's correspondence? Does this come down to the discretion of an individual FOIA officer?
I can give a legally answer for that one. One of the important things to keep in mind for FOIA, we mentioned this earlier, is that it applies to public bodies. And that word body is very important because there are certain things that are not, so individual legislators are not public bodies. So the city council is a public body, but the ex-ward alderman is not a public body themselves. So in different contexts, committees of legislative bodies are treated as public bodies, and in other instances, they're not. I think the most recent Attorney General opinion on this question was that committees of legislative bodies like a city council is a public body and therefore is subject to FOIA. So a public official's correspondence depends on who the public official is. The mayor is subject to FOIA because the mayor's office is the executive agency is considered a public body. The communications of their staffers, if they're paid by the mayor's office, those communications would be relevant. If the public official is an individual legislator, so if you have in mind like Mike Madigan, for example, a former public official now, likely his individual correspondence would not fall under FOIA unless for some reason it was because the office of the speaker To be honest, I'm not 100% sure about how that's treated, but in general, only public bodies are subject to FOIA.
Awesome. So we've come to the end of the panel. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Just in the last like minute or two, why don't we go around and say, share where folks can find you online, and then if there's anything you want to plug, whether it's a project or joining your organization, feel free. We can start with Ramson.
I'm easy to find. I think on all the social medias, I'm Ramson Cannon. If you have a legal question, Cannon Law Group is my legal practice, cannonlawgroup.com. You can reach me at Ramson at Cannon Law Group. Yeah.
Okay.
You can find me anywhere on Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time, Kelly Garcia. I'm also going to keep plugging FOIA Fest. Go to more panels. There's so many more great panels this weekend, so please go to them. But yeah, keep supporting local newsrooms too. And also 48 for Neighbors for Justice. If you're anywhere in Edgewater, Uptown, or Andersonville, hit us up. We're here for you.
Myra?
I can be found anywhere at Myra, M-A-I-R-A-K-A, Myrica. And I would plug that there are going to be some major updates in the Green case on that fight for release the records very soon. The oral arguments and the appeal of his case were last week. So I think we will have some big city council questions coming up. So I'll post about that stuff there. Also at Invisible Institute.
I am Trina T. Trill on the internet. If you want to look me up or follow me, I don't only talk about work. I talk about myself and being unapologetically Black. So prepare thyself. I also, there will be an opportunity to volunteer with the Invisible Institute, reading lots of narratives. If you're interested in that kind of work, it's really important for this project that we're working on. Please send me an email, send me a DM. You can email me at trina@invisibleinstitute.com. Same with Myra at invisibleinstitute.com. The last thing is that I will be moderating FOIA Police and Prisons for FOIA Fest tomorrow. Please come and check us out. Really quality, phenomenal panel. I have some really good questions planned, and I'm really looking forward to contributing more to FOIA Fest. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists as well. And I hope you enjoy FOIA Fest this weekend. Great. Have a good night, everyone.